This is a 3-inch shell. 3 inches, you measure it across the diameter at the bottom, right? So not in length, but in diameter. And in fact, it's only a third of a shell, because at the top there was a dome, which was the fuse. And you set the fuse to explode either in mid-air or as soon as it hits something, an impact. And inside there were 500 little ball bearings. And in the bottom part of it here, there was a long brass canister called the propellant. And here you can see there's a band around it. So they put the full shell into the gun, and then they closed the breech of the gun and fired it. So this bit sails through the air, but inside the barrel of the gun there is a groove. It's what's called rifled. The band here fit into the groove so that it gives it a spin. So the shell doesn't come out like that, it comes out spinning. And the faster it spins, the further it goes. And of course, as it comes out, it makes a sound. Whizz! And then it explodes. Boom! Hush! Here comes a whiz bang. This is a whiz bang. And when it explodes, all these ball bearings come out. If one ball bearing hits you, let's say, in the forehead, it makes a small hole going in and it takes the back of your brains out on the other side. If a lot of them hit you, you're strawberry jam. If you're down in the trenches, you might get some protection, but if all these ball bearings come down, you can imagine they just slice you in bits. If the shell itself hits you, you can imagine the damage it does. Slice your head off. If it hits you in the side, it cuts your torso from your legs. It takes off arms, it takes off legs. It's just horrendous. This is a 5-inch shell, and you can imagine the bigger the shells, the more explosive, the more danger, the more damage it does to human beings. When it splinters into bits of metal, it's called shrapnel. And these bits of metal hitting you at hundreds of miles an hour would just destroy you in seconds.
And you'll see all the wonders of no man's land if a whiz bang hits you.
This is a front line British trench that you're in just now, right? And if you notice the shape, it's zigzag. If a shell landed here, all of you would be killed. But this is called a traverse, and it meant that the blast wouldn't get through the wall here to kill you. So you would survive, but you would be killed, right? Similarly, if the Germans captured this bit or shot anyone or got into the trench here, they couldn't fire in a straight line because they couldn't get through the bullets through, right? So the trenches were zigzag. Both the German and the British had the same idea, zigzag trenches, that was why. Now originally, you would have had a pile of sandbags in front of the trench, and that was called the parapet. And that was to absorb machine gun bullets or bits of shrapnel or blast. But you could never tell if a shell would land behind you. So you had to have a pile of sandbags behind you as well. And that was called the parados. So the parapet and the parados. And it was higher than your head to give you protection from the snipers. This was a sniper position. So you would have one soldier looking in that direction and another looking in that direction. Do you notice there's a space for the rifle, but there are 2 little holes there and another 2 here. That's because there were little trapdoors here. You push your rifle out and the trapdoor was closed. You push your rifle and it opens the trapdoor. You pull your rifle back and the wee trapdoor closes. Why? Because the Germans who are up there are crack shots. If you leave a space like this open, they will be able to get a bullet through that very, very easily and you're dead. Remember the song? If a sniper has you set through dents in your parapet, and your troubles fiercer get, never mind.
If a sniper has you set through dents in your parapet, and your troubles fiercer get, never mind. Oh, never mind.
The trenches were really damp and dark and really unhappy, and it felt quite sad to know people had actually lost their lives fighting in these conditions and walking around and living in these conditions that were so just dreadful.
What you have just done is to walk part of the last remaining original trenches in the Ypres salient. And at one time these trenches started away up at the channel and finished in Switzerland, 400 miles. So you could have actually walked to Switzerland through the trenches. And this was only the front line. There was the second, third and fourth. And the Germans had exactly the same up there. Let's just consider the living conditions here, right? It's wet, it's muddy. You cannot put a fire on because if the smoke comes up, the Germans will know there's people here and send a shell over to kill you. So you can't heat up any food. The water is brought up in empty petrol tins. And in fact, the soldiers got so good at knowing the flavour, they could tell the difference between a BP can and an Esso can. So you can imagine what that did to your tummy. Dysentery, diarrhoea, vomiting. You're here for 48 hours because that's as much as you can stand. And then you're taken behind the line to the second or the third line to give a break, and then you have to come back up here. You never get washed, so you smell, you stink. Of course, your body becomes covered in lice, so you scratch yourself. And the more you scratch, then you crack the skin, and the lice gets into it. You get typhus fever. Your boots and your trousers are soaked in the wet and the mud. And because you can't take your boots off, your feet begin to swell. You have to slice the leather, and you take the leather apart and bits of flesh come off with the leather in the sock. So it's called trench foot.
Felt really overwhelmed and shocked at the conditions that the trenches were in, because we've been told they were bad, but that's really dreadful, the conditions they lived in.
You're up to your shins in mud and everything, it's freezing cold, your food's rubbish, and meanwhile the Germans are always looking out to shoot you because they've got the high ground, the advantage. And you know, like your friends lying out there still dying, screaming for help, and you want to go out and get them and help them, but you can't because the Germans will kill you and him.
It is 1915. You are part of the PALS battalion of the HLI, the Highland Light Infantry from Glasgow. You have trained with your pals and you've been sent out here to Ypres to do your bit for King and Country. It is 7:30 in the morning. You're about to be given the order to go over the top to attack the Germans at the top of the hill. You have been given a tot of rum, you're standing with your rifle in your hand, and your pals are on either side of you. What would be going in your head at this point, just before you go into attack?
I was thinking, like, if I were a soldier just about to go over the top of the trench, whether or not I'd be, just as soon as I get up there, shot or shelled or something, or just one of the horrible things that can happen.
If you're thinking about yourself, will you be hurt? Will it be sore? Might you be killed?
I was thinking how my family would have been, like if I was going to die, like when I would be there.
If you're thinking about your family, your mums and dads, your brothers and sisters, your aunties and grandpas and grandmas.
I would be thinking about my home. Would I ever see my parents again? Would I be okay? Am I going to last much longer? How long will it be before this war ends? And I'd just kind of be feeling regret for actually deciding to come to the trenches to fight.
I thought, if I was a soldier in that trench, what would I be thinking of? And I didn't think of myself would I be hurt? I thought of home, and I got quite homesick quite quickly actually. And I thought, you know, why am I getting homesick now? I'm in the middle of a day, you know, it's all sunny and I'm standing, and I thought, but that's how those soldiers must have felt all the time.
You're no different from them. Do you realise that if you had been born over 100 years ago, you would actually be here ready to attack? You have not only been walking in the footsteps of the soldiers. At this moment, you are in their very minds.
Although I tried to put myself in the soldiers' places, it was really hard for me because I don't think that anyone can really understand what was going through a soldier's mind standing there, you know, not knowing if he's going to survive the next 3 minutes of the day.
The trenches were, you know, something physical that you could go in and you could walk in and you could see them. Standing by the tunnel, going through that, even though it was all dark and you couldn't see anything, you know, you did have the real experience of it.
They're as narrow as they are originally, and they had candles in them, not paraffin lamps, so that if the whole thing collapsed, the candle would go out instantly and you wouldn't be burned to death. But it was as wet and nasty and unpleasant as you just saw. And of course the place was overrun with rats as well. But at least it gave you some protection from the sniper bullets and from the mortar. But if a shell landed on top of the tunnel, the whole thing would collapse and you would have been buried alive.
The most I sympathised with the soldiers was in the trenches and at the museum at the trenches, because you saw things that were actually there and you could touch it.
Every country had its own type of rifle. The rifle at the top is a Lee Enfield rifle, British rifle. The second one is a Mauser, a German rifle. The third is Lee Enfield, and the bottom is a French rifle. Now, each rifle's had their own size of bullets. So if you got a French gun, you couldn't fire your own British bullets in a French gun. This was captured by a German soldier who, because he couldn't use it, because his bullets didn't fit a French gun, was damn sure nobody else was going to use it. Over here, we have gas shells. Now, originally, poison gas was used, and they had it in cylinders, and the gas hissed along a long tube, and you held the tube towards the enemy, towards the British, and you waited for the wind to blow it towards the British lines. If the wind changed, and it came towards... So the first use of poison gas wasn't very effective. You had to try and get the gas directly in to the enemy line. And that is when they come up with this. These are gas shells filled with liquid gas. So when they exploded, the liquid met the air and turned into poison gas. And you could fire these shells more accurately in to the lines of the enemy. During the First World War, the soldiers went into battle with cloth hats on. They had always gone in with cloth hats, they didn't need anything else. But of course we had better weapons now that fired shrapnel, bits of metal. And so they came up with metal helmets to give the soldiers protection. Now if you look at the very first one there, it's a German helmet. And you can see it's domed at the front and domed round at the back to give protection for the head. It was an excellent design. If you look at the ones next to it, you see they are British helmets. They were called soup bowls because they looked like a soup bowl. And they just sat on top of your head. But it wasn't such a good design. And look at the very end helmet. I often think, who was the last person to wear that? Because obviously he didn't survive. And yet, there's his helmet.